Hi, everyone. This is acyuta-bhava from Nightlight Astrology. Happy Tuesday, everybody. Today, we are going to break down a number of different charts. I'm going to take a look at a birth chart and teach you something about transiting, forecasting, and a big mistake that's really easy to make and really easy to correct. It's kind of something that I teach my year two students about when it comes to forecasting and prediction. And one of the easy ways that you can kind of screw it up, it's something that I still catch myself doing. I made a mistake I'm going to show you guys about last spring and how I corrected it and how to work through it even with a client if you're working with someone. And then I'm going to take a look at two different horary charts. I thought I would do this because typically I like to mix it up and add in a little bit of live chart work or demonstrations of chart work. Because I know that a lot of you out there like to study on your own, and it really helps if astrologers aren't just doing mundane forecasting, but also giving you some tips about how to read charts. So, going to be a little craft session today. Before we go into that, however, I want to talk about, I also want to give you some tips for how to interpret the lunar cycle. And we're going to take a look at what we can expect from the moon in Libra over the next couple of days, and just give you some basic tips for within the framework of what's going to happen. The moon in Libra, kind of use that as a larger example of how to read key moments in lunar cycles each month. So some kind of craft stuff today with a little bit of forecasting for the next few days with this lunar cycle tip that I'm going to give you guys too. Before I dive into all of that, I want to remind all of you that I am fundraising the last 40 days of the year. There are 23 days left or something like that. We have 547 backers as of the time that I'm recording this. We're trying to beat last year's goal, which was 690. So we are almost there. If we get there, last year our stretch goal was to get, I think last year, I'm trying to remember. Yeah, I think last year it was somewhere around 350 or 400, and which we've already surpassed this year, obviously. We ended up stretching it to 500, and then we ended up stretching it to 600. It almost got to 700. So we'll see how well we can do this year. But at any rate, when you do pitch in, I really appreciate your support. Anything that you give helps me to support a 3-person staff that is part of the production of all of this content year round, and a team of people that I have helping me develop all of the curriculum that I work on with my students and things like that. You can pick up a lot of different rewards too that are pretty cool. There's at the $25 level, there's a mantra meditation video. I teach you some tips if you want to start a mantra meditation practice. My Astrology of 2021 in-depth dive video, which you can only get through the Kickstarter, is there. There's a couple of different workshops I teach on predicting with eclipses, nodes of the moon, on the mystical side of Saturn. There's a year ahead horoscope reading for your sun or rising sign that you can get, where I go in depth for the whole year for your sun or rising sign. You only get the month by month breakdown on my channel. You can also pick up, there's some mini readings where I actually personally record a little brief reading for you, giving you a sense of what your biggest transit of the year is in your birth chart. There's some horary readings, and then there's 50% off all of my online classes, which is a really good deal if you're thinking at any point during 2021 you want to take those classes. They're transferable. If anything were to happen and you had to take it later, that's no big deal. So they're really flexible. My wife's online herbal apprenticeship is on sale there too. So lots of good things to pick up. And you can also combine the classes, and they get even more discounted when you bundle them together. So, well, in the link, I should say, is in the comments section as well as in the description of this video. So thank you everybody so far for pitching in. We're doing really well so far. We're almost getting to our goal, so that's awesome. Thank you guys so much. It's been a joy to produce all this content for you in 2020, and can't wait to do it again in 2021. And if you can't pitch anything in, I always tell people, like, your prayers are also really appreciated. During this 40 days, I have more focused time of prayer and meditation, really reflecting on what I've learned as an astrologer, what I want to get better at, things like that. So you could just throw a prayer up for me too. That's always appreciated. All right. So now what we're going to do first is I'm going to give you some tips for interpreting aspects of the lunar cycle. And in order to do that, I'm going to talk about what the moon is doing over the next couple of days. So it's a little bit of a forecast meets some workshop tips. All right, so let's begin by talking about where the moon is at right now. Now, when you're in the midst of eclipse season, as we are, you're between eclipses, it's kind of like a surfer who's in between the massive sets of big surfing waves that are coming in. Now, there's everyday waves you might catch, but you know how surfers are. At least I've met some surfers in my day. My wife and I've done some yoga and surf retreats before in the Outer Banks in North Carolina, which was the only time I actually tried to surf, and I really enjoyed it. But I was like, yeah, you'd have to really give your time to get really good at this. Um, so at any rate, the surfers will, it's like they get really excited when there's particularly good waves coming, and they keep their eye on that kind of thing. Well, we do too as astrologers, right? Those are called eclipses. Normal big wave sets are your hard quarters of the moon cycle, your new and full moons, your first quarter, last quarter moons. That's typically when you see the energy ramping up throughout the rhythm of the month. Month, of course, is a word that comes from the word moon and month. The moon is what divides our zodiac into 12 signs. So the sun is the great circle of the zodiac, and the 12 signs are reflective of the many that the moon represents, breaking the one into the many. The moon is the distributor of energy every month because the moon is like a reflective mirror, and it picks up, this is what ancient astrologers said, it picks up the influences of all of the other planets' lights into its reflective dish and then disseminates it down to Earth because it was the planet closest to the sublunary sphere, the earthly sphere. So it acts as this kind of messenger and transmitter. It's our satellite, but it's collecting all of these higher heavenly influences and bringing them down to us. So as the moon goes, so goes the day, so goes prognostication. Whether you're doing electional astrology or horary astrology, however the moon goes, that's how things will likely play out. So we pay a lot of attention to lunar aspects. Well, and also we pay attention to the big parts of the lunar cycle and then the big wave sets during eclipse season when you sometimes get three eclipses right in a row. So we're in between eclipses right now. We're on the waning side of a lunar cycle. What is a waning side of a lunar cycle? You can break it down into waxing and waning. From the new moon, you've got the promise or seeding of a new karmic cycle. And as the moon grows, that promise is developing until it blossoms and appears, whether it's good or bad, difficult or easy, or some blend of both. It tends to appear around the full moon. And then the waning side can be talked about actually in a few different ways. It's the incorporation of the experience. Sometimes people use the word integration, though I almost personally feel like it should be like a quarter word jar because I hear it so much. But it's dissemination, meaning it can also be about the release of the fruits into the world, the falling of the fruit off the vine. And it can also be about the letting go and the disintegration or destruction of the cycle. So the waning side is more diverse. And not surprisingly, the moon in ancient astrology was actually more comfortable with the waning side because it features more. I think the way that you can understand it is that it features a multiplicity. It's doing a lot. It's doing a lot of different things as it's kind of on the light side, it's building and collecting, and on the dark side, it's disseminating and distributing. And there's a kind of manyness that the moon, I think, really likes about the waning side of a cycle. It's not always easy on the waning side of a cycle because we're also dealing with, as we just went through a last quarter moon, can be crisis around releasing, letting go, surrendering. There's a death in the dark side of the moon. So at any rate, all of that being said, you always just want to check, are we on the new cycle? Are we on the waxing cycle or the waning half? And then you're looking at what type of aspect is being made on any given day. So let's take this forward just one day, and I'm now going to put the moon into Libra. So the moon in Libra is seeing the sun through a superior sextile, which means in aspect terms in ancient astrology that the moon has a kind of powerful influence over the sun. It's also a sextile, which means it's constructive. This is finality that is constructive. You could also, I'll just put this in the center, just kind of give you a sense of how I will arrange an interpretation. So if the moon is disseminating, and it's a sextile, sextiles are of the nature of Venus. So I might write something like constructive, harmonizing, completing, right? So constructive, harmonizing, completing. So you get this energy of the moon trying to bring things to closure, resolution, to conclusion, and it's doing so harmoniously, but it's not building something, it's releasing or completing something, right? So that's kind of the baseline of your interpretation. If you want to get a feeling for the most general way in which the next couple of days will go. And I'm telling you right now that these words will sound rather generic unless you're someone who spends a little bit of time paying attention to and tracking these cycles. And it's also very difficult to pay attention to and track these cycles if you have a really overly busy mind. That's why meditation helps. This was a contemplative art form for ancient astrologers. And so if you want to be able to notice these things, in a sense, you have to position yourself in the flow of the cosmos. And how can you do that if you're, if you're always on your phone, or if you always have a busy mind? This is why a meditation, a mindfulness practice, journaling, something that clears the thoughts out of your mind through physical activity, taking care of the temple of your body, not having too many chemicals in your body all the time, right? That kind, you know what I mean? Just like, or like, caffeine or sugar or whatever, like just kind of trying to keep the channel clear as best you can. That's going to help you track these things as well. Now, as the moon is trying to harmonize, it's not in its own sign, it's in Venus's sign. So we need to take a look at Venus and see what Venus is doing. This is a tip. Unless the moon is in Cancer or Taurus, the moon is going to also be trying to do what it's doing, disseminating, closing, concluding, harmonizing as it does so. It's going to be trying to do so through the lens of what its host is doing, Venus. Well, Venus is debilitated in Mars's sign of Scorpio. And if you trace the dispositor chain a little bit more, Mars is getting into a square with Pluto. So what is in the moon in Libra doubles down on the Venusian symbolism that the sextile includes in the last the waning crescent phase. So we're getting a moon that really wants to harmonize, that wants fairness, that wants diplomacy, peace, symmetry, balance, beauty, and it's trying to synthesize and bring things to a close. But it's dealing with a Venus that's more conflicted and a Mars that's ready to explode. Okay, so that's a little bit difficult. That suddenly you get the feeling that the stakes are a lot higher because peace is going to be harder to come by. Do we see anything else echoing that? Oh yeah, we do, because during this waning sextile over the next few days, the moon will go through an opposition to it's going to go through an opposition to Mars. It's going to go through, and you can go through the Antitia if you want to with Neptune, which is not easy for the moon. Neptune, it can point to things that are secretive or fantastical or a little delusional. We're trying to think of the challenges that might come up for the harmonizing, right? And then you can see there's going to be some good harmonization with Mercury and the Sun. So things probably will get done. But look, it's not going to be easy because the moon is also going to go through the gauntlet of Pluto, Jupiter, and Saturn. So these are difficult aspects, and it has been that way for a while when the moon goes into a cardinal sign. So you can then just, again, I recommend keeping it very general, because the more specific that you try to get with astrology, the more likely you are to miss entirely. Whereas the more that you try to get down, kind of boil down to the core, most basic themes, and then maybe come up with a few synthesis possibilities around them, the more likely you are to get it right. So, for example, let's say we're trying to harmonize and conclude things, but we have to go through conflict, adversity, resistance, or hostile opposition, right? Because we've got an opposition to Mars. We're also trying to, we're going to go through issues that have to do with, say, principles, rigidity, conformity, conservative energies. And that's the stellium with Capricorn. So even just putting those keywords up and knowing, like, okay, in the next couple of days, the impulse to want to bring things harmoniously to resolution, but to be facing conflict, adversity, resistance, or hostile opposition from Mars, while also dealing with the need for principles, maturity, rigidity, conformity, or conservative energies, and that there's going to be a clash between all of this as things are trying to peacefully resolve themselves in this lunar cycle. Now, in the background of all of this, I know that eclipse is coming. What kind of an eclipse? A solar eclipse. And the solar eclipse means a new beginning. So this is you could put it all together then and say, there's a big wave coming that wants to launch us into something new, a big new promise that's being planted. Before it's being planted, as you guys have heard me say before, this is your end level boss. How big of a deal is it? It's not the biggest deal in the world. You don't have, you have a very fast moving moon. This lasts a couple of days, but it helps you to know what kinds of forces you're likely to meet in the next few days. And then if it's me and if I'm really tracking in a lunar journal or something, I want to know, okay, well, when is that Mars, when is that moon energy going to come through and potentially create that hostility? Well, I look here and I see, well, it's going to be during the middle of the night, Thursday, this Wednesday into Thursday night. So that's probably not going to, I may not recognize that as much. Maybe I see it Wednesday evening. Maybe I see it Thursday morning. I always personally breathe a little bit of a sigh of relief when it's not in the middle of the night, because the odds are that, when you're in the middle of your work day and the planetary transit is hitting, you'll notice it a bit more. That's not necessarily true though, because the orb of influence for the moon is pretty big. Like you'll be noticing this. Like if I'm in Minneapolis, I've noticed this on Wednesday. Anyway, so that's where we're at. And I thought that you guys would find that useful, because if you ever want, and you can play that same game of breaking down, okay, where are we at in the cycle? Even if it's not eclipse season, where are we at in the cycle? Is the moon trying to build something, or is it sort of on the releasing side of the cycle? What type of aspect is it, and what type of the nature of the aspect? If it's a square, it's of Mars. If it's a sextile, it's of Venus. If it's an opposition, it's of Saturn. If it's the conjunction, then that's the seeding period. And if it's a trine, it's of Jupiter. So you can piece together what's happening, or what we're trying to do energetically in the most general sense by the phase of the moon, and then look at its ruler, look at its sign, look at the aspects that are forming from the moon while it's in that stage, and you'll get a sense of exactly what types of scenarios are likely to occur. So anyway, for those of you who are interested in lunar tracking, this is something that we do in depth in my horary class and in my year 2 class. In the year 1 program, we're more focused on breaking down natal charts and learning how the ins and outs of natal interpretation from the kind of classical traditional perspective. A lot of it's Hellenistic astrology. So all of that being said, I now want to, so that gives you a sense of what to expect over the next few days too, right? And if you create forecasts, by the way, every day or even once a week for yourself and nobody else, and you're a practicing astrologer, that is the quickest way to become more proficient, not only as an astrologer, to develop a platform if you are starting a blog or something like that, if you're trying to sort of start some element of a professional practice, but it's also going to make you a better reader of charts, because the better you are at identifying the solar lunar phase and the dynamics that were going on. A birth chart is just a snapshot of the sky on any given day, and that picture may have more power over the course of an entire life. But if you can read the lunar cycle like I just did on a particular day, you've got a kind of stencil that'll help you understand what a lifetime is about. So understanding the lunar cycle is huge. All right, now I want to show you, next I'm going to show you something that is a mistake that I think a lot of people make in reading birth charts. I certainly make it from time to time. I made a mistake in my practice this past spring, and I'll talk about why I made it, how it's easy to make, how to fix it, and also how to deal with it if you make it with a client, if you make this mistake with a client. So I am going to show you a hypothetical chart that represents my mother's chart. This is actually set for December 31st of 2020, but the one thing it shares in common with my mom's chart is Venus is at the same degree that it's at in her birth chart, which is about 19 degrees. So you can see this is not my mom's chart, but this is a chart that has that one element in common with her chart. And this is what I want to show you guys. Some of you know who follow me on social media that my mom and her partner both got COVID-19 in November. My mom was only briefly hospitalized and then was sent home. It was for her, it was because she got so badly dehydrated, but she was dealing with upwards of 103-degree fever, shakes, headaches, like the worst health that she said she ever experienced in her entire life for basically 2.5 weeks. And then it took about 2.5 weeks more to get rid of the feeling of fatigue. And this is my mom, as someone she's a cyclist. She bikes a lot. She works in the hospital. She's a nurse practitioner, so likely that she picked it up from her partner, who is also works in the hospital. But he was actually in the ICU for over 2 weeks on oxygen. So they both got hit really hard. He's a marathon runner, by the way. So it's just such a crapshoot. I have another friend whose parents got sick and they recovered in about 10 days, and it wasn't nearly as bad, right? So we know that it's a bit of a grab bag. We know that certain populations are more likely to have really bad cases or possibly even pass away. I've had a number of people, not anyone really close to me, but people in my larger spiritual community back in DC who have had parents who have died. So we know that we know that it's a bit of a grab bag. It's a bit of a crapshoot. But here's what happened. My mom was asking me about her chart, which she does from time to time. If you're an astrologer and you have family members who are at all interested in astrology, count yourself blessed, because many people deal with families who are completely closed down or will think you're just a total crackpot if you're into astrology. My mom is really adventurous, got the Sag rising, so she's into it. And she said, she doesn't ask me all the time, but occasionally she's like, what do you see coming up? Well, okay. So now this is where I want to just bring this up for you and give you a picture of what I saw, what I said, how I got it wrong, and then how I fixed it. So let me just animate the bi-wheel here. Okay, so now I'm going to, hold on just a second. All right, so here's the bi-wheel, and you can see Neptune. And Neptune is the planet that I was tracking. And I'm going to go back to essentially last April when I made this prediction. So, and when I make a prediction, it's not like I'm sitting there going, I predict that this shall happen. It's not like that. It's like, well, what kind of weather is coming? What kinds of possibilities do you think are likely to occur? Okay, so first of all, I was looking at my mom's chart, and this is not her chart. It's just something that represents her chart and the Venus placement in her chart. And I noticed that Neptune is coming into a square with Venus in the next month. So, I knew that her and her partner were in the process of packing up, cleaning up, getting ready to possibly sell their house and move. So that's pretty low-hanging fruit in terms of Neptune in the fourth house of home and property, squaring Venus, the goddess of love, in the first house. How about a location change? That would be one of a short list of things that would be pretty standard for transits in the fourth house, to a planet like Venus. Are you in a relationship? Could that relationship be affected? Yes. Could from the fourth house, could it have something to do with home and living environment or family and love? Yes. So that you're just combining those themes, the house and the planet, right? Now, but the thing that I worried about here, given that there was this was the early stage of the pandemic, and I said, you guys both work in hospitals, right? And I'm a little bit worried because, Venus is in the first house here. And the first house in ancient astrology was the house of health. And health is, a lot of people think the sixth house is the house of health, but in ancient astrology, the sixth house is the place of accidents, injuries, disease, sickness, calamities, misfortune. It's also a place that has to do with sacrifice and certain degree of service, or people who work in those environments. But the primary thing about the sixth house is sickness and difficulties, not health. The place of health is the first house. That's your vitality. That's the place of health, your vital force. Planets that are, challenging planets in the first house can indicate problems with health. A lot of planets in the sixth house, depending on what they are, could indicate problems with health too. But that's because they're pointing to disease or sickness. Generally speaking, Venus in the first house is a sign of someone who's pretty, often pretty vibrant and healthy. And that's been my mom pretty much her whole life. So, but I look at this and I go, anytime that you're getting a major slow moving outer planet squaring or opposing a planet in the first house, you will see health issues pop up. It's one of the possibilities. Does it happen all the time? It could indicate some other things, but that would be one of the possibilities. So I said, I think you guys need to be really careful because you both work in the healthcare industry, and they're obviously it's a little bit more high risk place to be working right now. And the Neptune Venus dynamic, they have a pretty happy relationship. So I wasn't sitting there going like, well, it's going to spell the disillusionment of their relationship, which it could. If I had a client who was saying, hey, I'm in a relationship and it's on the rocks, and I see Neptune coming for Venus, I'm like, well, that could be a little bit, more dicey. But at any rate, Neptune here is coming into a square. Squares are of the nature of Mars, so you're thinking of some degree of conflict or challenge that is coming into the Venus territory. That could be health. And because I know that she's also partnering with someone who works in the health industry, I thought, could you get it from your partner? Could you give it to your partner? Could this be, so basically the prediction that I gave was be careful of your health in the month of April and May. And I explained this, and you can see here's the transit being made by the end of April. And then in May, it's within about a degree. So I just said, be careful of essentially, April and May. All right. So that was the prediction. Totally wrong. Nothing happened. It was just business as usual. But they were packing up their house. So that was kind of that part of it. And I thought, well, I just got it totally wrong. Okay. Fell asleep on a simple thing. The transit does not have only one exact aspect. And this is something that people miss all the time. So if you take this forward a little bit, Neptune's going to station. It's then going to move backwards. And now it's coming back over that 19th degree in August. You can see it like late August. It's coming over and into September, right? And then in November, it's still a degree off at about 18 degrees. Okay. So two mistakes. One, I focused on the first aspect that was directly in front of me as a reader and didn't focus on the later aspect and include that the same potential symbolism could repeat under the next pass. That's something that occasionally happens to me because I get so fixated on, like for in this case, I was just worried about my mom and her health. And so I said, well, be really careful in April and May, and didn't happen. And I go, oh, and I just forgot. So this, and then, comes back, and in November, Neptune is getting ready to station and turn direct, and it's still within 1 degree of a square to Venus. And that's when she and her partner did indeed get sick. So the other thing that I easily could have gotten wrong is that in ancient astrology, there's a 3-degree range within which a planet is said to be engaging with another planet by aspect. So transits to the natal chart, everyone, will do this a little differently, but if it's within 3 degrees, I consider that to be the range within which you could very reliably see the kinds of themes and events coming up that the aspect indicates. And so the other thing that I could have gotten wrong would have been to say, well, it's only when the aspect is exact at 19, or even if you wanted to go down to the minute, 1950 in this chart. Only when Neptune is at 1950 that something will happen. Well, that's also not true. It's always remarkable to me, though, when things do pan out where it's so exact, it gets down to the day that something happens. Like that does occur, not uncommon, but I've seen it very frequently that it's within there's within that 3-degree range applying or separating. That's when you're going to see the events promised by the transit really show up. So remember a 3-degree range, and remember that aspects often take a couple of times. And if you're making a short list of possible things that could happen for somebody, which, that's an interpretive skill that I can't go into right now because that would be a whole, that's what my whole second year program is about, right? But when you're making that short list, you just want to make sure that you say these themes could repeat throughout this block of time from this time to this time, and then highlight the specific times at which it is accurate or it's perfect. So if I had said another target period, though it's possible any time within this period that you and your partner would get sick or that health would become a real issue, it is I would target, maybe the month of, see, we got 19, all the month of September as a possible moment. I'm not exactly right, but if I've said, look, the transit spans from this time in 2020 to this time in 2021 or something like that within that 3-degree range, and here are some target dates, when a client sees that you predicted September they could get sick, but then in November they got really sick, they're not going to hold your feet to the fire about that and be like, well, you got it so wrong. They're going to be like, yeah, especially if you explain, you got it right. And then especially if you explain in a reading that these transits have time frames around them that aren't, it's very hard to make it an exact science. Some people are better at that than others. Why is that the case? And if people ask, well, why? The simple reason for why that's the case is that, well, we don't always have, we don't always have exact, it's the example that I always use is the full moon. When do you feel the effects of the full moon? The morning of, the evening of, the morning after? Well, you can experience the effects of a full moon in a kind of under an umbrella of different times. Again, the morning of, the evening of, the morning after. So at any rate, and people who work, by the way, I worked as a social worker with schizophrenic and schizoaffective clients, and as an art and activities therapist in a residence home in Manhattan. And come full moon time, there was a higher rate of decompensation, but it was not predictably like the night of the full moon. It could be right around, it was like, it was a little window, but it was right around that time. So things move like that, just like, the energy in the world is not like a mechanical clock exactly. There's more like energies that are moving in waves. So the planets are representing like wave patterns in a sense. So you have to remember that too. At any rate, so that's how I got that wrong. All right. So I think what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn to 2 horary charts that I want to show you, which will also just round it out and give you some more fun things to think about today. So also, if you're considering taking one of my horary classes, the prerequisite is that you already understand aspects, the meaning of houses, that you have a pretty good kind of more of an intermediate grasp on astrology, and you have to also understand the traditional language of dignities. If you already know all of that, then you're good to go for horary. If not, you should start with my year 1 program. Anyway, this is a missing object horary that I got right, which is rare because they're very hard. Like, this is probably my lowest rate of getting horaries correct, right? Because it's not always easy to locate. It's kind of like looking for a needle in a haystack. But at any rate, here is, where is my missing voice recording pen? First of all, isn't that kind of James Bond like that they have a voice recording pen? I didn't even know such things. Well, I suppose if I thought about it, I wouldn't be surprised that they existed, but I just didn't know that they existed. Speaking of voice recording pens, yesterday I came up with the greatest game in the world. I have a little pen that if you click a button, it turns into a laser pointer. And so I was hiding in different parts of the house and shining the laser pointer around on the floor, and so my kids could see it, and they were like completely going bonkers, like, what is this, right? 2 and a 4-year-old, right? And then like I came downstairs and I was like looking all, and I was like, guys, and they were like, what, daddy? And I was like, I think there's a fire fairy in the house. The whole evening we were hunting for fire fairies, and I was finding very creative ways of shining the laser around and then watching them chase the fire fairy. Anyway, best game in the world. It doesn't only work on cats and dogs. It also can easily deceive your little children if you want to do that. But I did promise my kids that at some point I would try to capture the fairy. So I figure at some point I've got to make a pivot to helping them understand that the fairy is in the pen, and then maybe let them play with it. But those things are also dangerous. Like, like I'm pretty sure that I was like, my wife was like, they're going to shine it in each other's eyes. And I was like, yeah. So I guess dads always want to take more of a risk. Anyway, so where is my missing VR pen? So in a missing object horary, I follow, by the way, for all horary inquiries, I got to promote one of my teachers here, the Horary Textbook Revised Edition by John Frawley, a great text for beginners. I've been studying with him for a few years now, and I credit him for really taking my horary game to a whole new level. I've been studying horary since 2012, and then I started with him in 2017, I think it was, in his apprenticeship courses. They're awesome. I'm not anywhere near as gifted as he is, but he's a great teacher, and I've learned a lot and become a lot better horary astrologer because of his work. William Lilly, the Christian astrology textbook. There's others too that are really important horary books, like Guido Bonatti's Considerations, and there's lots out there for people who are into horary, but I like his textbook a lot. Anyway, in his textbook, you would recommended advice is to look at the ruler of the second or the fourth. Sometimes the moon is going to represent a missing object. If there's a specific missing object, you want to look at the planet that might represent that object in particular. In this case, I decided that Mercury was probably the best. That Mercury is the culprit. Right, Mercury is going to represent the VR pen. And the main reason that I decided to do that is because the querent is always going to represent the ascendant rule, the planet that rules the ascendant, as well as the moon, typically. And what do we see here? Well, the querent is Jupiter. And we can see that if the VR pen, who is under the beams of the sun, so invisible, combust, maybe damaged, but look, it's just separating from Antisha with Jupiter, the querent. This makes sense since they, it oftentimes that's kind of a clue in that, like, they just lost something, right? The other thing that's interesting about this one is that it would suggest, because a conjunction means that they're together, because they're just separating, it means it's close to her somehow. It's nearby. So that was one of the first things I said, is it's nearby. It's close to you. She knew it was in her house somewhere, which is sort of, I think that's one of the prerequisites for a missing object to work. It's a lot harder to locate missing objects that aren't, in your own home. Although I did have a horary one time, which I've demoed before, where I helped a farmer find a missing bull in a neighbor's field, which was interesting. Not just a neighbor's field, but a barn in a neighbor's field that it had gone into. Anyway, so in this case, we say, well, so we're getting the sense that it's nearby. It's combust you could look in the 12th house, and there's a whole list of places that might fit a 12th house description. You could use the description of the sign, double-bodied. Double-bodied signs often means that it's tucked inside of something, a cupboard, a drawer, a purse, a desk, that it's, inside of something. And the other thing, fire sign would mean near a source of heat or light, and but invisible somehow, not where you can see it because it's invisible behind the light of the sun. Maybe it's combust, it's in its detriment, maybe it's damaged. I also like to get a little artistic and creative and say, okay, look, if it's behind the sun and it's in a fire sign, a light source, but maybe also tucked away somewhere, in a cupboard or on a bookshelf where there are books or pieces of knowledge, because the sun is also as a source of illumination. It's a source of truth and knowledge. And I've seen horaries in the past where a planet has combust the sun, and it's literally like tucked behind a book or under a book or something, where the sun can represent a source of knowledge or light, illumination. So anyway, I offered some other things as well. She ended up finding the object very quickly. Now, the other thing I said is it's likely you will find it very quickly. Why? Because the moon, one of her co-significators, applies very quickly to a trine with Mercury within 3 to 4 degrees. So I just guessed and I said within 3 to 4 units of time, maybe hours, days, weeks, etc. Well, she found it between 30 and 40 minutes later. So minutes ended up being the 3 to 4 ended up being 30 to 40 minutes, which is wild. I don't often get the timing. Timing is a little bit more sketchy with horary. I'll just say that. Anyway, so the moon applies to Mercury, a good sign that you're about to find it. You're about to contact the object. Where was it? It was in a cupboard filled with books, sitting behind a candle. Amazing, right? Sitting behind a candle. And what were the books? All Eastern philosophy texts and astrology texts. So this one was so vivid and so amazing. Now, on the other hand, I cast a chart looking for Strawberry Baby, my daughter's, my little one's little bath toy that she plays with, has like a strawberry hat on its head. Could not find it anywhere. Still can't find it. Have been looking at the horary since this past Sunday, and it's like, yeah, just not finding it anywhere. So sometimes, it's like and there was no testimony in the chart that I cast for my daughter's little baby doll that I was going to find it either, unfortunately. So I'm hoping I do, but we'll see. And that's the thing about missing object horaries. It doesn't always work so nicely. Like I'm using this example because it's so bright, but it's probably like, I don't know, maybe 20% of the time that a horary for a missing object in my practice comes through clean and easy. A lot of the times it's because the object is lost and not coming back. But other times it's just, I don't know what I'm looking at in another person's house or what it's like. It's a lot easier if you're doing it in your own house or the lay of the land. But at any rate, so that is a fun missing object horary. All right, I'm going to show you guys one more horary for the day, and then we'll be done. So let's see here. Okay. Here it is. Will I win the case? All right. So this is another horary that I happen to get right. I only show, most of the time, I only show the ones I get right. But sometimes in my classes, especially, we look at the ones that we get wrong because you never want to let a horary go without understanding either why or how you got it right or how you got it wrong. Because either way, that knowledge is what helps you grow as a horary astrologer. Anyway, so this one's kind of fun. Will I win the case? This is someone who was dealing with a kind of an internal review, dispute, mediation type of situation, inner workplace. This is not the court that was involved, but there were people involved that were essentially trying to determine, like a board, like almost like HR, that was trying to determine the outcome of a dispute in the workplace between the querent and another person. So like court cases in horary, first of all, we want to identify our querent. You got Aquarius rising, so she will be Saturn and she will be the moon. Now, her opponent in an open conflict is going to be the 7th house ruler. That's the sun. Now, the deciding body, there's two ways of looking at this, and a company has something to the equivalent of a judge or jury that's going to decide the dispute and what happens and who's favored, essentially. Then you have the judge, which is going to be the 10th house ruler. In this case, that's going to be Jupiter. Let me try to, so here's the judge, Jupiter. Or the final outcome is sometimes looked at as the 4th house ruler, which is the end of the matter. Now, there's a lot of complex rules for this type of a case, but essentially what you need to do is say, does the judge or the company or the final verdict go by aspect to either of the planets immediately? That can be a sign that one party is going to win out or be favored in whatever the outcome is or whatever the determination or decision is. In this case, we see that the judge is Jupiter in Capricorn, which is the sign of Saturn. So it's in Saturn's rulership, whereas it has no affinity by sign for the sun. It's not in any of the dignities of the sun. So initially, we see that the decision making, the decision makers already favor our querent. The next thing that we can see is that the end of the matter, signified by the ruler of the 4th house, Mercury, is going right into a trine with Saturn. And so this is an example of a chart where I said very clearly, looks like the decision will go to you. The judge, quote unquote, favors you, and the verdict, the end of the matter, is coming to you swiftly. And so this person who was disputing something about this woman, my querent, they had a kind of a feud going on, and her charges were really extreme and over the top, and they just dismissed them. There was like, nope, there's no evidence of this. So sorry, nothing we can do here about this. Now, whether I'm not saying what's right or what's wrong, because I don't know the situation at all. I just know the bare bones in a sense. But this was an example, a very clear-cut example of the decision going to the querent, and that's what ended up happening. So horaries can do some really amazing things. They aren't something that you ask questions about just willy-nilly. You have to have some deeper stake in the question. Like if a querent said, hey, could you do a horary chart and just tell me, when the world is going to end or something like that? Like it doesn't work that way. It works best when it's treated like, a personal, when there's personal, something at stake for someone personally, and they're asking a question about an outcome. And oftentimes horaries are a little bit more of the yes or no variety. Yes, this will happen. No, this won't happen. So should I questions, a little dicier for horary. You have to have the criteria very clear. Should I move to Nebraska? Well, why are you asking? Like, what, the oracle can't tell you what to do, right? So what would be most helpful for you to know about being in Nebraska? Well, would I be happy there? Okay, yeah, it looks like it'd be a good match. Or will I find love if I move to Nebraska? Or, you know what I mean? So there's something more specific that can help a person make a decision. Then horary is useful with should I questions, but most of the time, yes or no types of questions are the best. Anyway, so that's what I've got for you guys today. I hope that chart demos are something that, I once in a while I throw in, as you guys know. I hope you find it interesting. Remember that my Kickstarter is running until the end of the year. We're at 547 backers as of this recording. We need to try to get to 691 to beat last year's record. If you pitch in, you can pick up a bunch of different rewards. I really appreciate your support. Hope you have a great rest of your day today. Take it easy, everyone. Bye.